Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Bridge Project. This project has been created to bring together Conscientiology researchers from all over the world in order to facilitate knowledge exchange and sharing of interassistantial experience. That's a free online talk that we have every first Sunday of the month, where the speaker presents a topic of self-research. This year we are having some months doing it in English and others in Spanish. Okay, so before we start and introduce our researcher, okay, let's talk about ISIC. ISIC is Interassistantial Service for the Internationalization of Conscientiology. It's a non-profit organization run by volunteers formerly within the ICCC. ISIC has the status of a pre-consciential-centric institution. Okay, and our motto it's about opening doors and building bridges. Okay, we want to connect the world. Okay, so today we have with us Luciano Melo. Thanks for joining us, Luciano. Let's
Thank you.
introduce our researchers. Luciano Melo is a conscious self-researcher. He has a PhD in political science from American University, DC, USA, a master's in international relations from City University of New York, and he is an invited researcher at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., United States. Luciano has been a conscientiology teacher or facilitator since 1994, co-founder of the Institute of Conscious Researchers in 1988 and Communicons in 2005. He has been very active in producing conscientiologic gestations. He is a co-author on the books Double Citizenship, Extraphysical Projectors, The Path of Serenismus, Conscientious Creations, and he has a coming book now in 2021 that's a lucid reading. He's current volunteer at the Holoteca and at CEAEC, and also a volunteer for Editares. Luciano researched the field of conscientiology, and today he's going to talk a little bit about his experience with self-research in Seriexology. Luciano, thanks for joining the Bridge researchers, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marcelo. Thank you for the invitation. I'm so grateful. It's a pleasure to give my first actually lecture in Conscientiology in English, which is amazing that I'm going to be talking about my self-research in terms of past lives, basically. The personalities that we may have been in the past, which is very exciting. And I want to thank you, Marcelo. Thank you all the support that ISIC has been giving me. It's pretty amazing. I think it's a space that is fundamental in order to expand the ideas of conscientiology. I'm seeing that we have a lot of friends already: Luciana Lavor, Miriam, Ana Paula Lage, Cíntia Braga, Alexandre Dungi, Renato Araújo, Mário Santos, from lots of places. So I'm going to give you a good morning because I'm in the morning here in the US. I'm going to give you like an afternoon for people in Brazil. From people in Europe, I don't know, probably it's good evening. So we are all over the place. I think it's very important to say this right in the beginning, the principle of disbelief. So please do not believe in anything that I will say here. You have to experiment. You have to have your own experiences. And today in Conscientiology, we have many ways of doing that. So we don't have any excuses. Okay, so we can go ahead. So today I'm going to talk about seriology, Seriexology, which we're going to talk a little bit more in ample terms. But what I came here to tell you is much more about my self-research, about how I got to the conclusion, what is the hypothesis for the personality that I may have been in the past, how have I gotten there, which is I think is the main point of being here, right? To actually share the methodology that I've used. So I'm going to talk how things worked, the chronology of all of the events. I'm going to talk about the method itself. I'm going to talk a little bit about the hypothesis of the consecutive personality, the comparative analysis, because once you get to a hypothesis, you really have to test the hypothesis in order to see whether or not you may have been that personality. And there are a lot of ways of doing that, and we can see some of them. And of course, you can ask whatever you want to know more about it. And then we're gonna talk slightly about the holokarmic analysis and what are the next steps in terms of proaxis, in terms of existential program, based on the fact of having discovered this consecutive personality. And I'm gonna restate here that it's very important. It is a hypothesis. I'm not able yet. I think only after we die we are really able to see, okay, I really was that personality. But right now it's a hypothesis. Of course, it has great chances to have been that personality, but I cannot really say that I was. And then, if we have time, we can talk a little bit about all of the synchronicities and all of the multidimensional events that happened while I was doing this research, and actually serve in order for you to really see whether or not that makes sense. So once you start the research, we know in Conscientiology, a lot of multidimensional events start to happen. Many of them related to synchronicities, because obviously the consciousness itself is always sending those things, thoughts, sentiments, energies to the universe, and the universe obviously answers back. And then you may get into this role of synchronicities. And when that happens, it may bring a lot of possibilities for you to test your hypothesis. So we can go ahead, please, Marcelo. So the first thing is important to say is that Seriexology, it's a field of the science Conscientiology. We already have a big book, treatise by Pedro Fernandez, which is Seriexology, multidimensional. Yeah, I was not being able to read it. Multi-existential evolution, lucid multi-existential evolution. So this is right now certainly the best source where one can find all of the information, not only about Seriexology, what it is, which is basically the research in consecutive lives, but also all of the mechanisms that govern serial rebirth and the effects on consciousness, including the law of cause and effect, which superintends the entirety of the evolutionary process. So that's why I will bring a little bit of this holokarmic analysis, because the law of cause and effect is one of the main parallels that we have in the universe. And then it really affects on how we're gonna resolve things, and we're gonna advance in terms of evolution, personal evolution, group evolution, how we're gonna continue our work in this dimension. So it's really important to have this perspective as well. We can go ahead. So let's talk a little bit about Luciano, because I think everything that happens in our lives, they obviously are not by chance, right? We know that things are connected to us in some sense. If we were there, if we were interested in there, if we follow someone to do something, chances are that we have some relationship with those events, right? And then I think the it only shows that research in conscientiology is pretty much alive. right? So it's always happening. You always have to be paying attention to all of the details that is happening. And in 2011 and 2012, Luciano Lavor, which is a close friend that I have who lives in Foz do Iguaçu, she was starting to study the Adams family, which Adams was the second president in the United States. So you imagine in the 19th century, in the beginning of the 19th century. And she was really interested in researching his family because she was also studying or researching the possibility of being part of that family. So she went to New York. I was living in New York at the time. And then we went to Washington. We traveled to Philadelphia. We traveled to Boston and Quincy because that family is from Massachusetts. So we went to Boston and then this tiny little town in Massachusetts as well to visit their houses where they were birthed. And I was thinking, I always thought, I don't know why I'm following her basically everywhere and getting into contact with this family. I was already living in the US. I didn't have per se, let's say, a huge affinity with that family. I I always felt that I had a big affinity with Abigail Adams, which was the wife of the ex-president. But other than that, I was really thinking, what do I have to do with this? And this is like the first clue that I think is important for people to notice. If I was going with her everywhere for her to do her research, chances were that I had something in relation to that family directly or indirectly. And then we will see further why that was the case. We can go ahead, please. So the first thing that I did in terms of methodology, it was in 2013 in April. I basically decided to list. So that is the actual Word document. All the people that I knew that were related to volunteers from the ICCCO, the Conscientiology. So I knew, for example, that people were studying Balzac, that people were studying Elizabeth Browning, Darwin, Florence Nightingale. There were people related to Rabindranath Tagore, which is from Pakistan. It was a poet and a spiritualist. And I knew that I had relations with Simon Bolivar because I basically studied in my dissertation. One of the countries was Venezuela. So then I put John Adams there as well. And since I was living in the US, I put some dates that I thought that were important. For example, when I went for the first time in Georgetown, which is a neighborhood of Washington, D.C., but it was basically the beginning of the city of Washington, D.C. Before Washington existed, Georgetown was a little town. And when I went there for the first time, I was so happy walking on the streets. I was so not in peace, but like in preliminary, like in a energetic springtime. It was really wonderful. I really love as well the city of Washington, D.C. So I decided to put some dates related to George Washington. I love the Library of Congress, which is the largest library in the world. It's amazing, and I knew that John Adams had some relationship with it. Is the Smithsonian, which is basically a huge collection of museums that are free, open to everybody here especially in Washington, D.C., but it's the National Museum. And I knew that John Adams' son had relationship with the Smithsonian. It was him who really pushed to have a national, not only museum, but research institution. and it became the Smithsonian. So I also decided to put something related to Lincoln because of the Civil War, because I had in my past this hypothesis of having a relationship with abolitionism, and the fact that I went to American University, which is a university that was founded in 1893, and it was basically founded by the government. So to me, that was a very interesting detail. So as you see, I thought, okay, I'm gonna put everything in this paper. I'm gonna put all of the dates, and then I thought, okay, so if I I was in the past to see if I continue to be with this group, and a large part of this group was in the past between the 18th century and 19th century, and even the beginning of 20th century. I'm gonna try at least to try to find someone that is in that bracket of time, right? It could have it could have backfire. It could basically mean nothing. But in the end, actually, it was really helpful to do that. Please go on. So in May of 2013, and this is a very important document to me because it is related to one of the methods that it's used by consecutivos, which is the institution in Foz that works with Seriexology. So they use more or less the same structure in order for you to discover your your I don't even know how we could translate this in English because it's not a password, but a word that basically connects you with all your previous lives. So at that time in 2013, I decided to put on the paper basically four 4 areas of knowledge or 4 areas in which I had relationship with. So obviously, people who know me, I have deep relationship with art, museums, aesthetics. I still work doing book covers, logotypes for Conscientiology. I worked with advertising for decades before becoming an academic. Another area that my interest is deep into is politics, diplomacy, philosophy, law, social change. And on the sides, I really decided to put all of the clues that I had that really those areas were important in my life. For example, politics. I studied human rights a lot, ethics, political regimes, cosmopolitanism, all of the things that I research in the while doing the masters and in the PhD program. They are all there, like saying, okay, this is really true. It's not something that is out of my mind only. It's reality. Another thing that it's really strong, it's parapsychism. I've always been parapsychic since I was a child. And one of the main events that happened in 2002 was a cosmic consciousness, one of the events. And that was really a benchmark in my life. It was also a watershed, but anyway. And the other part is the academic part, education, science. I'm really interested in all of these kinds of things. And I also, on the right, you can see I listed some characteristics of my temperament. I've always been really a revolutionary kind of person since I was a child. I used to even discuss with teachers when I was in the elementary school for you to and really discuss deeply if I was against something or if I didn't agree with the teacher. It was awful. I was really wanting to change everything, and it was highly critical of everything. So this, I thought, if I need to find someone that has the possibility to have been me, this person needs to have these characteristics. Otherwise, it's not me. It wasn't me, right? And also my main traits, which is intelligence. I have this contextual intelligence that nowadays I call cosmophysiological intelligence, because I'm really able to put together multiple dots to make sense of something. That is something really easy for me. I'm really always been interested in research. And another characteristic that is really strong is that I'm not organized, not even nowadays. I tried and I tried and I'm getting better, but it's one of my main weak traits. So that's one of the things that I thought, okay, that person, whoever that person is, should have more or less these characteristics. Can we go on, please? And then, please go back. Please go back, because there's something important that I have to say. Okay, so what it was my conclusion, which is written in Portuguese actually. So my conclusion is that I could have been someone related to the Enlightenment movement. I think everybody knows the Enlightenment, that it was this huge movement, social, cultural, political, economic, that happened in late 18th century and all the 18th century and part of even the beginning of the 19th century, that really changed the perspective, the way people see the world. And I thought, okay, all of these characteristics somehow are related to the Enlightenment. I could see myself being part of the Enlightenment. So please go on. So one of the things I've done, from May to December of 2013, I decided to read all kinds of biographies. Not that I bought lots of books and read like huge biographies. No, I went and decided to read something about Voltaire, about Locke, about Condorcet, and all the people that you can imagine, including members of the Enlightenment from Germany, from Portugal, from Russia, from Italy, even despots. Because one of the things that we know, that the possibility is that you might have been not as cosmoethical as you are today, right? So there's the possibility that we were authoritarian, that we're members of monarchy or the church or whatever. And so I decided to really read a little bit about everybody. And nothing really hit home. I would read about Locke and I would say, okay, I have a lot of things that I think the same as Locke. However, there's this characteristic that it doesn't really has to do with me. Like Adam Smith, for example, he's really considered nowadays, which it's kind of ironic because at his time, I don't think he really thought about that, the father of capitalism. So I really knew that it would be impossible to be me, especially because I'm not a huge fan of capitalism. And secondly, because economics is really not my forte, even though I study and really like, but it's not something that it would be the main trait. So nothing really seemed to be the case. I read about a lot of people and nothing really excelled, let's say that. So please go on. Thank you, Luciana. She's saying that this is the seriexological reasoning. Today we are a better version of us, but not so much different. Exactly. So I think I used that reasoning. I thought, okay, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, or even 1,000 years ago, we are not that different. It's really slow. Changes happen really slowly. So if I want to discover something that was in the past, someone who was in the past, it needs to be really close to the way I behave nowadays. At the same time, it cannot be a person that is much better than I am today, because that doesn't make sense. So that was the reasoning that I used at the time. So everything changed when I finally bought a book that it's called Enlightenment in America by Henry May. Because I thought, okay, I'm not finding anybody really related to the Enlightenment in Europe, which is, of course, the cradle of the Enlightenment, and not even in Russia, right? That part of my research was in Russia, and I lived in Russia for a while. So I tried to even study all the despots in Russia, the czars, and really didn't make much sense, even though I have obviously deep relationships with them. But then when I finally read that book, I looked at Thomas Paine, and you can go onward, please, Marcel, which is this guy. So in February of 2014, basically 1 year after I started really going deeper into this research, I found Thomas Paine, which if you remember that document with all of the dates, it's completely within that bracket of dates. So it really fit. He also is considered a member of the Enlightenment. Please go on. And this is like a super brief path that this personality ended up going in his life. So he was born in England, in Thetford, in 1737, and then he met what's his name? I got a blank. Okay, it doesn't matter. So he went to the United States in 1774 because he met some Benjamin Franklin, of course. He met Benjamin Franklin in London, and then Benjamin Franklin basically wrote a letter saying, if you go to the United States, please, people in the United States, take care of this fellow because he is a member of the Enlightenment and etc. So he went to America, which was not the United States yet, right? It was basically a colony from the British Empire when he was 37 years old. And then there he participated very strongly in the American Revolution. And it's important for people in general to know that the American Revolution was one of the most important events in political history and in social change. It was the American Revolution that influenced the French Revolution. Especially in Brazil, we are very used to study about the French Revolution, right? Because of all of its principles, etc. But we never really studied deeply or in depth about the American Revolution. And I don't even know for sure if it is the case that the French Revolution would have been that way if it wasn't because of the influence of the American Revolution and what had happened in America. So he went to France when he was already 53 years old after living in the US for a while. And then he participated in the French Revolution. Then he went back to the US and he died in New York when he was 72 years old. And it's interesting because I lived in New York and I haven't always been a fan of New York. Now I like more. But while I was living there, I was always kind of annoyed with the city. And then, of course, I discovered that he died in New York and not in a very good life. He was poor. He was basically not loved by almost anybody in the US. So it was a very difficult end of life. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I was not really a fan of the city. Please go on. But one of the things that I've done, do you remember that I talk, if the guy was not a revolutionary, that cannot have been me, right? So this guy, if you read all of his his biographies, his work, people who study him, he was considered a radical revolutionary. When we study the Enlightenment, there are the moderate and there are the radical ones. The moderate, they want to make a compromise. Oh, it's okay if the church or if monarchy continues to have power. So that's why we have, for example, the monarchy is still in a certain level of power in the United Kingdom, right? Because in Britain they decided that uh, to do this kind of compromise and the monarchy continue to have some level of power. And here in the US, obviously, because of the revolution, and in France, because of the revolution, there wasn't this kind of compromise. There was this radical idea that should have a rupture with secular power institutions. Secular is not secular in the sense that here in the United States, with secular, there is like centuries, institutions that were centuries and centuries in power. That is basically the monarchy, aristocracy, and the church. And another characteristic that it has always been considered a citizen of the world. He throughout his life he had, of course, the citizenship from Britain. Then he went to the US, he got the citizenship in the US. Then he went to France, he got the citizenship from France. And he always said that his home was the world. He was a citizen of the world. But then I think it's important to say that there is the very, not the very, but the negative side of those singularities. For example, yes, he was a revolutionary and he wanted to bring democracy to the world, which is great. But he was okay if force was used, if violence was used. Later in his life, he wrote a book that was not published, that he was against all of the violence that happened in the French Revolution, which is great. But he was one of the people really who said this cannot continue to be this way. The relationship between America and the Kingdom of Britain, and if we need to do a revolution, if we need to go to a war, so be it. And obviously, this is not a very good side of being a revolutionary. Also, because of he was a radical, on the one hand, it's good that he wanted no compromise with monarchy and the church. Obviously, we have this idea nowadays very strongly of the separation between the state and the church, and that's what he wanted as well at that time. But at the same time, a radical personality have a lot of difficulties with concessions, right? So if it was not his way, he would go away. That's why, for example, he ended up in France, because after the American Revolution and when it came the Constitution of the United States, and when, for example, the black community was not allowed to vote, he said, no, there's something wrong here, because how is that possible? How we are going to continue to have slavery? So he said, this is not the place I want to live. So he went to France. So obviously, we know that any change needs to have levels of concessions. It's impossible to impose change unless, of course, it's 100% the destructive cosmoethics, which is rare. But in any kind of change, you really need to be together with people who think differently from you. And this being a cosmopolitan, of course, it's amazing to be considered a citizen of the world, but it got to the point that he was basically, he became stateless completely. He lost his French citizenship because of the reign of terror, right? That came briefly when the revolution started. Then he came back to the US and he was not considered an American anymore. And that he couldn't go back to England because in England he was being tried because of the things he wrote against the king in England. So so it was a very difficult situation. But nonetheless, he ended up dying in the US. So you can see that there are always the good side of things and the bad things of things. And when I look, especially in the past, like 10 years ago, yeah, no, 7 years ago, when I came to this understanding, I look at me and I was completely that. I am a very cosmopolitan person. I lived in Brazil, Venezuela, Russia, the United States. I speak other languages. I visited a lot of countries. I love culture. But at the same time, I have sometimes this radical kind of thinking. And I want to change things fast. And when things are not my way, I tend to make like a rupture. And this is obviously not positive. And I've been working with these strong traits and weak traits since then. Please go on. So, in terms of the continuation of comparison, especially in terms of traits, so I've noticed while studying Thomas Paine that he had a very reactive kind of personality. All of the books he wrote was based on reaction to something that it was happening. It was not like, oh, now I'm gonna see it and I'm gonna write a book because I'm researching this. No, he saw the situation how it was in the US between the colony and between the colonists, and then he wrote Common Sense, which was a very incendiary book who ended up leading the American Revolution. So it was always a reaction to something, and the same happened in regards to the French Revolution, and the same happened with his last book that I'm going to talk a little bit about, when he talked against the organized religion. So in terms of strong traits, he was very insightful because more than 200 years ago, he had a very clear sense of what it was good for humanity in terms of democracy, in terms of even distribution of land, even in terms of religion. So he was a very intelligent person, and he had these values and principles that were really introjected. So they were really strong. He really followed values and principles. But then comes the idea of not having a lot of flexibility. That's what that I talked about a little bit before. But in terms of weak traits, he had really difficult with dealing with authority, and this has always been my issue since I was a child. Anybody who I perceive to be in an authority, but being authoritarian in some way, of not being democratic, I would go against. So that was really one of my difficulties, and that's why, for example, during the elections in the US in 2016 and 2018 in Brazil, it was really hard to deal with that situation that was happening in both countries. But I think I'm better now. I've been recycling myself. So I hope I'm getting much better with this. And another weak trait is that this leads to isolationism, right? For example, I have the tendency, and he had a huge tendency. If it's not my way, I'm going to go and live alone. And he lived alone in the US for a long time in a cottage that I went to visit. And I, for example, when things were not going my way, I lived in the Caganopolis in Foz do Iguaçu. I really wanted to be alone, and then I moved to the US to study. But I felt good because sometimes groupality or being in a group or socializing too much becomes hard for me, and I need some time alone. And some ambiguous traits related to him, and that I saw that it was related to me as well, was related to diplomacy. On the one hand, he worked even for the foreign agency in the United States in the beginning of the United States, and he went to France many times to discuss diplomatic aspects and even to ask France to help the United States against Britain and even in the beginning of the United States. So he had these diplomatic traits like I do, but at the same time, when radicalism came in, all of the diplomacy would go away immediately. And he has something that I called Franciscanism. So I don't know if everybody knows the saint San Francisco, which is San Francis in the US. So San Francis is an interesting person because he had like a cosmic consciousness, and then he was from a rich family, and he decided to leave all of the wealth behind him. Uh, yeah, and if there's any question right now that someone thinks that it's important to ask, that maybe could be lost later on, please do it now, and then Marcelo can help me.
Yeah, Luciano, thanks for the presentation so far. It seems that you have been very clear. Okay, if you have questions, we are going to come up with them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Marcelo. So, Franciscanism is that idea that wealth or being rich is not something good. So, for example, in all my life, I was like this. Oh, I can do this for you, but please don't pay me because this I'm doing pro bono. No, I don't want money. Or even, for example, when I had to choose between Communicons when I was one of the founders, or continue to be in a advertising organization that was being created at the same time, I chose Communicons, but then I didn't have a lot of money to live in Foz. So it always comes to this idea that getting money, especially through using your strong traits, is not a good thing. So he was this way as well. He never got one single penny from from his books whatsoever. He ended up completely poor. He had to get a lot of help from other people in order to survive. And this is, I think, it's very ambiguous in a way, because we know in Conscientiology that, of course, the best thing you could do is to donate your knowledge, right? Especially books. But when it comes to a point and you cannot survive or live like a stable life, there's a problem there, right? Please, Marcelo, click another. And then I think in terms of a synthesis of his holodosing, is that he was completely anti-tyranny and he was completely pro-universalism. He was really for all kinds of people to come together and etc. And he wrote a lot about that. So I see myself a lot like that as well, but with all of those ambiguous traits behind it, right? That can really nudge, can bring that dark aspect to a very bright trait. Please go on. In terms of revolutionary, for example, I have been studying my revolutionary tendencies since long ago, since when I was founder of the EPC Consciousness Institute of Research. No, Institute of Consciousness Research. I wrote an article about it called Consciential Evolution or Revolution. So I was very aware of that. and then I think Thomas Paine only came to corroborate that that was real. Please go on. Also, cosmopolitanism is weird because I was born in Rio Grande do Sul, right? So is everybody knows that Rio Grande do Sul wanted to be separate from the rest of Brazil for a long time, and there are separatist groups even now. But even before the 21st century, I used to get, for example, this Christmas card from my mom saying that she could see myself going through all the world and uniting people and etc. So somehow I always had this kind of Holothosine, even though I was born in Rio Grande do Sul. Please go on. And one thing that I did that I think this is really important, because what I'm trying to show is all of the methods that I used in order to test the hypothesis on whether or not I could have been that particular personality, or I could have been someone who believed in the same ideas of that personality. So it gets to the point in this research, and I think everybody who researches a lot of someone, it gets to the point that that becomes irrelevant if you were or not that particular person. What becomes extremely fundamental and crucial is what do you get from there? What do you understand about yourself? What you're going to do with the knowledge that you acquire by getting deep into that holodosing? What you're going to do with that? What are going to be your next steps? But one of the things that I think it's crucial is that you have to test the hypothesis in all kinds of ways. You have to do the parallels in terms of personality, in terms of traits, in terms of the same things that that person believed. And one of the things that I think it's works incredibly is, for example, when you compare things that that personality wrote with things that you wrote before discovering that personality. So that's what I decided to do. Obviously I had lots of things written in Conscientiology. I already had finished the master's degree, which was in international affairs. So I had my master's thesis, my master's dissertation in Brazil, and lots of articles. And then I already had started the PhD program, and I already had decided what I would write my thesis on. So I could really go back, look all of his writings, especially the main ones, and compare if those ideas were close or not to what I had written. So this is the 5 books. Of course, the middle book, it's not possible to have access to it because it was not published. But if you got the main books, there are those 4. That is the Common Sense, the one that is related to the American Revolution, Rights of Man, that is related to the French Revolution, Age of Reason, that he wrote against organized religion and agrarian justice, in which he proposes a lot of policies in order to distribute wealth, is basically the things that I think today, and they are even modern today, to be honest. So please go on. Yeah. So in terms of comparison, if we get the Common Sense, what is the focus of the Common Sense? It's regime change. He wanted to show that the monarchy could not continue on. Why monarchy is bad and why democracy is good, and why, especially America at that point, should get rid of the monarchy and basically institute democracy. So, of course, he was writing a pamphlet about democratization. And this is my field of research. So when I started the PhD in comparative politics, that's what I've been studying so far, democratization. And that's why I study Russia, I studied Venezuela, I studied even countries that are in process of autocratization, that is the opposite of process of democratization. But basically, this is my field of research today. So it's obvious that, as Luciano was pointing out before, we continue doing almost the same things. It's almost ridiculous, but that's the way it is. Please go on, Marcelo. Also, for example, he was one of the first one to ask for a League of Nations because he wanted a confederation of nations to abolish the war, and an European Congress with delegates from various states to act as a court of arbitration. And basically, if we get my master's dissertation, I write in the conclusion that what matters is a supranational structure like the European Union that represents one of the concrete possibilities of a more everlasting peace, so to abolish the war, since it is highly improbable that one member would engage in war with other members to the economic, social, and legal accords constituted among them. So what basically I'm saying that I want a confederation of nations because, of course, if they are working together, the probability of war is lower. Please go on, Marcel. In terms of the rights of men, who was basically where he talks about, of course, the rights for humanity. This is my master's was in international affairs, but my focus on was human rights. So there are some of the courses that I've taken: international law, women's rights, human rights, violence and politics, ethics and politics. So it's incredible how things continue more or less the same. Please continue, Marcel. And if we get the Age of Reason, it's really interesting because it's again organized religion, but he really talks about the first cause of what we call in Conscientiology the prime thousand, or the first thought, emotion, a sentiment, and energy that created the world, right? And a little bit about that he's against religion, but at the same time he is a deist, or he believes in the first cause, the cause of all things, or basically the prime thousand. And he says that it's difficult beyond description to conceive that space can have no end, but it is more difficult to conceive an end. It is difficult beyond the power of man to conceive an eternal duration of what we call time. And please go on, Marcelo. And this is a report, an account of my consciousness experience in 2002. And it's interesting that I write a lot of things that are related, that I say that it is impossible to describe in signs, words, language, that was what was experienced at that very moment, or how long that phase lasted, since there was no chronology or space, since there was no subject or object. It was only now the so-called eternity, and the consciousness itself liberated from all restraints. So basically what I'm saying is there is no space and there is no time. It's all eternity. And then I talk about the feeling of omnipresence, the feelings of omniscience and omnipotence of the first cause, basically. So please go on.
Yeah, we have a question from Mario Santos, Luciano. Well, Mario says, I've heard a quote in a documentary: the 19th century belonged to England, the 20th century belonged to the US, but China will dominate the 21st century. Do you agree with that quote?
Yeah, pretty much. In the history of humanity, of course, we have these huge powers, right? We have, as we had Greece in the past, then we have Romans, we have even in the past we had Egypt, right, as the cradle of civilization. What is different today, I think, and I agree with him when he says that not England, but the British Empire in the 19th century was really the main power, and the 20th century was really in the beginning divided between the US and the Soviet Union. So it was not only the US, but then it became like the main power after that. But all the powers come to an end. And China, I completely agree that will dominate the 21st century, not only in terms of force, but in terms of cultural change. I don't know if you guys noticed, at least here in the US, it's really easy to see if you go to Netflix. The amount of called C dramas, that is Chinese dramas, they are all over the place. And I've been watching them too because I'm always interested in trying to understand these changes. So yeah, on the other hand, I think we are getting to the notion as well. So I think these things are in parallel, that even though China may be one of the main forces in terms of hard power, in terms of really being strong in economic and military terms, we are getting to the notion that it's impossible to do anything in this world alone, right? The proof is this virus, that when you think, okay, now we are controlling something, there's a variation in another country that goes to another country. So I think it's basically the idea that, look, if we don't do something together, there's no possibility to continuity of the human race, because either we are destroying the environment, or either we are destroying the environment, eating the animals that were in that environment, and then being affected by the viruses that we weren't affected before. So yes, we will see, in my opinion, China as one of the main forces, but I think it's getting to the point that it's inevitable that things will have to do in tandem or in group.
Yes, the paradox of that all the evolution it's in
Yeah.
group, okay, and you'll be interesting
It's
how
a
we.
paradox, Marcelo, because even if you think about ourselves, there is something that it only belongs to you. It's you have to take care of your evolution, right? But at the same
Correct.
time, you're really impaired if you do it all by yourself. If you don't share with the group, or if you don't even do something with the group, and that's why we have the idea of max hyperaxis, right? That all the people have a role in something bigger. And that's exactly where we see the world today. I think individualism is really strong since the Enlightenment, and that was one of the bad seeds, I think, in about Enlightenment. That the man was the center of the universe, and you could do whatever you wanted to do with your life. But look at the consequences, right? If you don't do it together, if you don't think about others, if you don't see even non-humans, if we don't respect non-humans, where do we want to go?
Luciano, before going back to your presentation, can you, for someone that's a first comer to Conscientiology, can you define what it's ProX?
Yes. So it means existential program. It means that, of course, we see this since the world began, that some people come and change the world, right? Some people really come with an idea that is different, with a project that never had seen before, and things change for better for everybody. But it got to a point in which this happened mostly at random. It was mostly because those consciousnesses, those people, they were really uh, like iconic people, right? But then it got to the point in the evolution of this planet that it was possible for larger groups of people to program their next life. And this changed everything, because then instead of dying in one life and coming to another life and basically without any map, like we like to say, right, without any program, without knowing what you've done before, what you're going to do in the future, now we had between lives courses in which people were able to not study about themselves, but to really see the program that they would be implemented in a future life. So one of the reasons why we study not only about past lives and we study Seriexology is because there is these moments in between lives in which we may have studied something, we may have programmed something, and it's really important to remember that. I like to say, some people say, oh, it's not important to know about the past. Oh, really? So go to bed and imagine that in the morning you woke up without memory. It's not important to know about the past. Can you imagine not knowing anything you were before? You don't have an identity. You don't know, what you don't know. So of course it's important to know what happened in the past.
Perfect. Thank you for the answer.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Back to you, back to the presentation.
Please go on. Please go on. So even when I had the cosmic consciousness, I gave a course in the IPC, that it was the institution that I was part of, that it was called Are You Cosmic Conscious? So it's interesting that even though Thomas Paine was known primarily because of his political views, right? And his social ideas and social change and revolutions and etc. He had very clear this notion of being part of something bigger, of being a consciousness that is unbounded by the restraints of time and space. So I think that there's a match that is very important as well. Please. I see Deborah saying, studying Seriexology bring us more lucidity about who we are now and what coming next. Exactly. Exactly. I think the point is not to, and I want to make this point again, because in Brazil, of course, Thomas Paine doesn't mean a lot, but in the US, obviously, he's really known. He is considered one of the founding fathers of the United States. And then I've always been like on the fence on whether or not I would talk so openly about this hypothesis, even talking today, right? Which basically it will be posted on the internet and anybody could access. But I want to re-stress that it doesn't matter if I was him or not. What matters is to discover part of myself that was related to that time, to those ideas, or to that personality. That's what it's important. And it's important not to be so seduced or so in awe about the fact that you were someone important in the past, because you can look at your life right now and you think, okay, so he was really important, he has done a lot of things, what have I done myself? Because you basically can stop doing it. It doesn't mean just because you did something great in the past you're going to do it again. So to maintain the evolution of things and not to bring the same old ideas, right? Only talking about democracy, only talking about this, without the spin that the consciential paradigm brings. I think it's a huge waste of time. It's a huge waste of research. So
And
let's look at the past to see today and to say, okay, so what I'm gonna do from now on.
Luciano, I think that it's very connected with the question from Ana Paula Lage about, hi, Luciano, great presentation. When someone has a cosmopolitan behavior throughout lives, in what are the elements related to these traits which will be qualified throughout the lives?
So thank you, Ana Paula, for the question. Great question. I think it's obvious that you are one of them, right? You are very cosmopolitan, always being interested in other cultures, in other languages, in other people. So I think again we have this very positive holothosing, this set of thoughts and energies and ideas that really can propel the person to universalism, to be open to something that is different, to be open to something that is not what you think. So that makes you, for example, to access more easily other aspects of yourself that were not related to this culture. Because imagine if someone like me, I was born in Brazil, I was born in a state that is very restrictive, right? That wanted to be separated from the rest of the country. So if I had lived my life only there, thinking within that culture, with those ideas, thinking that the state I was born is amazing, there's nothing else like it in the world, chances are that I'm not going to be able to access much of myself from the past, because myself in the past was not in the state, in that particular state. Maybe the previous life I was in the same state, but the other lives you've been all over the place, right? So, in the one hand, I think being cosmopolitans brings this huge possibility of you more easily connect to other cultures in order to bring the elements of those cultures that are part of yourself, of your multi-existential baggage, let's say that. On the other hand, and it happens with me as well, I am very seduced by this. I love traveling. I love getting in contact with cultures that I think are completely different than mine. Uh, so this is detrimental in a sense that you can waste a lot of time only in the touristic part, even those obviously in any country that I go nowadays, even if it is a vacation, I'm doing self research. I'm trying to understand my relationship with that environment. But it gets to the point that someone needs to sit and write. Someone needs to give back all the information that it gathered from himself and from others. And I think we in Conscientiology, especially the members of the volunteers of ICCC, we got a lot from Valdo, from ourselves, from the courses that are available to everybody. And it's wonderful to travel, and I want to continue doing it. But the focus at some point needs to be given back. And only traveling and getting more information about yourself, it's not that, right? It will be helpful, but it's not everything.
Thank you, Luciano, and back to the presentation.
Thank you, Renato, as well. Thank you, Liliana. So to finish this part of this presentation, I I told you before, I told you guys before about the holokarmic aspect and the proexological aspects of this research. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you very much. We have a lot to, yes, we have a lot to learn. Yes. So looking at specifically Thomas Paine and myself, obviously he had a cosmovision because again, Ana Paula, people who are cosmopolitan, they have this possibility of having a perspective of the world that is much more expanded. It's not restricted, it's not narrow, and this is fundamental in order to access anything. For example, I have a friend in Brazil who doesn't speak any English whatsoever. And I've been buying a lot of books about the consciousness, about that are not really related to conscientiology per se, but they have very interesting information. And they are not translated to Portuguese because they are very small batches of printing. So I don't know what to do. Basically, I cannot send a book to him. I cannot even share a PDF because there is no PDF of that book. It's really difficult if you don't speak English, because a lot of new information, even in respects of the brain, in respects of consciousness, they are in English. They are not in Portuguese yet, or even in Spanish, for example. So cosmophysiology is extremely important. But the point that I was doing in karmic terms is that Thomas Paine was really good in some things and not in others, right? He was a huge defender of democracy, of change, and etc. But he engaged in a kind of narrative that incited violence at some level. If he said, for example, okay, democracy is what we need, and it doesn't matter as much and how it's achieved, there is a problem. He was, for example, George Washington, who was a general of the troops in the United States in the American Revolution, asked him to go and talk to the soldiers in order to give soldiers a reason to go to war. And he went there. And he wrote a lot of things, and he read to the troops and to the soldiers. So there is a whole karma related to violence and related to revolution, that it's not a peaceful revolution, which is Conscientiology nowadays, right? That we don't engage in violence. So I know, for example, that one of the things that I have to deal with in this life in order to resolve that issue, so I will continue working with the ideas of politics, but in another level, that is parapoliticology. So I have nine articles written. I have 2 encyclopedia entries, 1 tertulia matinal, and 1 course. I have a book in progress, and I have the project which many people who know me know about, that is conscientiocracy, the idea of implement a political regime that is based on the extra-physical communities that are more advanced. However, I will have to deal as well with the subject of peace, democracy, and rights, because there were elements of violence that were included in those political ideas and social ideas. So right now, for example, I already have a collection of 2,200 objects related to peace, democracy, and human rights. And my idea is to have, together with the Holoteca in Foz, to have a museum of peace, because I think it's one of the ways that I will resolve these issues from the past, that it needs to be resolved. At the same time, another area that is practically nowadays is one of my main interests is cosmoconscientiology, which is basically not related only to cosmic consciousness, but the idea of researching the consciousness itself beyond the holosoma. I think we have a tendency to relate the consciousness who are evolving with the holosoma, with the soma or the psychosoma or the mental soma, but we have not a lot of contact with the consciousness itself, or what, when you have a cosmic consciousness, or what even Thomas Paine wrote, that is that sense, that experience, the real experience in a daily life, that you are connected to something that is timeless, to something that is spaceless, and to something that is eternal. One thing is to know that intellectually, the other thing is to live that. And that is one of my objectives right now, is to bring that experience to a daily life. I don't want only a peak experience in which you have a wonderful cosmic consciousness, and then you come back and that effect lasts 1 month, and then you are back to being the the primate that you were before. So I want techniques, I want methodology in order to have this stable in a daily life. So in terms of cosmic conscientiology, I'm a member of the Invisible College. I have one account already written, one course, that is the one I talked to you guys about, one article. It is in progress, one book chapter and one entry. I'm writing the Conscientiology, the Encyclopedia of Conscientiology entry on cosmic conscientiology. And then I have this project as well, of workshops and a book about it. So see that what is important is, when you look at the past, is to really know where you were, what you've done, and what are the good things that you can bring and expand, and at the same time, what are the things that you have to resolve. And I have the idea, at least, with these three pillars, which are parapoliticology, cosmophysiology, and cosmic conscientiology, I will be able to do that. So that's the part of the presentation that I had for today. I have a lot of other slides waiting if someone asks something about multidimensional events or synchronicities that happen in order to test the hypothesis as well. Or the question is, what are those things that make you perceive that you are on the right path related to that research on that particular personality? So
Thank you, Luciano. I think that we may have some time to show some of your synchronicities. Just before doing that, I would like to invite the participants to attend the next two events. April 4th, we are going to have one event with Marcelo Brivilati. This will be the El Puente, the bridge version in Spanish. And then on May 2nd, we are going to continue directly from Africa with Juliana Costa. We are going to have one event with her in English. Okay. Besides the next two researchers, I would like to invite everybody that's online for our third International Week of Conscientiology in Cognopolis. You'll be from August 20 to 29. It's an online event, and you'll be everything in English with simultaneous interpretation to Portuguese and Spanish. If you'd like more information, just visit our site, isicons.org. Okay. So if you want to go a little bit through some of your slides and photos, Luciano,
I
we still have
want to,
some time.
but Marcelo, I want to go back to that slide in which I have those circles.
The circles?
Do you remember? Yeah, in the beginning. Yeah,
Let's
because
go.
I have something to say about that first.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is the one. So this was in 2013, right? I didn't have any other method that was given by an institution or was researched by other members of of Conscientiology, and then I got to that. And this year in January, I did a consecutivos course, which was completely amazing, and I think it has to have to happen in English. That was online, in which I was able to sit and go much deeper into the areas of my life that are the main ones that structure the personality, not only in this life and the previous lives. And I got to three areas which basically are there, but they became much clearer now, which was the cultural area that included all the art, museums, aesthetics. The other one was the political, obviously, because it's one of the main ones, and even include the academic and educational part. But and the third one, instead of parapsychism, uh, I I chose something that is more, it's ample, I think, than parapsychism, which is spiritualism, because obviously in the past that I chose some paths related to not only the church but to mysticism that deal with cosmic consciousness and samadhi and nirvana and this kind of thing. And and in the course, the idea is actually to find one word or two words that really connect all of those areas in your life. And with that word, or two words, or three words, you are able to go back in the past and see whether or not it fits with hypotheses that you have in terms of groups, in terms of personalities. And it's really, it's an amazing course. So I ask urgently that consecutivos give this course in English, because then people will have more access to it, and it gives you so much clarity about today, about the future, about the past, and everything.
And and then always we can remember that when you are doing online events, we have not only the option to do the course in that particular language, like English or Portuguese, but we also can work with simultaneous interpretation. That's also something that can be explored with consecutivos.
Deborah said that we can translate it. It was really amazing to see all the data about it together. Yeah, it needs to be. So let's go a little bit further, Marcelo, so I can talk maybe one or two examples of what happened in terms of synchronicities. Basically, right now, what I've done is to present all of the hard methodology that I've done, right? Comparison in terms of text, in terms of writings, in terms of personality. But it's pretty good to talk. I'm not going to talk about this one because I don't have time, but can you go further? Go further a little bit. Further. Go on. Yeah, this one. Go back a little bit. Go back one slide. Yes. Perfect. Exam. Okay. Not well written. Anyway. I think one of the main things that it needs to be taken into consideration as well is the multidimensional events, the parapsychic events, the synchronistic events, or projections, or clairvoyance, or when you go to a group or parapsychic group, or what other people say, because they may clarify whether you are in the right path regarding that research. So in 2009, I did the exam of imagistics, and then you're basically sit on a table and you don't know which object is there. I got a key, and you have to do 200 correlations with the object in 4 hours. And that key became one of the most important elements in my life today in terms of research. Please go on, Marcel. Before that, and I didn't remember on the day that I got the key, I went to the Serenarium in the RSA campus, and it's an amazing experience. I think everybody should do at least one Serenarium in his life. And I wrote about something that I called the key intraphysical consciousness, or consciência-chave, consciência-key. And then I put myself as the consciência-key, which I didn't remember. So look that before even getting the key, there were other synchronicities related to that. Please go on. And then I even wrote an article I presented at a conference that it was the first International Congress of Group Karmology from Aracê. And there is the printed version of the article with the same graph that I did talking about the intraphysical consciousness key. Please go on. And then what happened after that is that up to now, I found 19 keys everywhere I go, basically. 7 conventional keys, they are basically normal keys. 2 electronic keys, there are keys from hotels in 7 different countries. And it became like a multidimensional signal. Every time I find a key, which is very unusual, I'm sure everybody has already found keys in their lives, but not at that rate. From 2016 to 2019, in 3 years, to find some 19 keys in multiple countries and really weird places. And every time I got the key, it had an indication about something that I had to pay attention, or something that I had to go further into, or something that happened minutes ago that I didn't pay attention, or something that would happen. It was about to happen, and I had to be to have my attention on. Please go on, Marcelo. And that key was deeply related as well to Thomas Paine. For example, I went to Canada in 2016, and I wanted to see that sphere, which is in a park in Quebec, not Quebec, Montreal, because I think it's super beautiful, etc. And in that park, there's a museum. Go on, Marcel, please. And when I got to the entrance of museum, there was this huge key. Go on. And when I was inside, one of the exhibitions was about the influence of the American Revolution in Canada. And there is the book Common Sense, that it was the book written by Thomas Paine. The first edition in French, because, of course, the region of Quebec speaks much more French than English. And there was talking about Thomas Paine in the exhibition. So it was something completely not something programmed in any way. I didn't know that even there was a museum in the park. I went to see this sphere. Please go on. And even there was an exhibition about curiosities. Go on. And in one of the rooms, there was like a guy who collected a lot of keys and locks. So it was really surreal. Please go on. But one of the most surreal things was about really Thomas Paine. I went with Nara and Everton, who live in Foz and who are the coordinators of the holotheque of the CEAEC, to visit Thomas Paine Cottage in New Rochelle, which is a small town very near New York City. And we decided to visit because it was the first time I was going. And before getting there, we got a metro, we got the subway, and then we stopped in the Bronx. And in the Bronx, we decided that we would get a taxi, like a cab driver, Uber or whatever, to go to New Rochelle because it was not that far. And Everton and Nara started to ask me about Thomas Paine and whether or not I would assume that I was Thomas Paine, and I would talk and say to other people that I was there, blah blah blah, that I was him. And I looked at them and said, I will never admit that I was Thomas Paine. And then, please go on. One more. And when I said that, I look on the street, and there was a key. So they took that picture that I was holding the key. So is that level of things. Also, one thing that happens with everybody is that we oscillate in between. Oh, we really were that person. No, there's nothing to do. It's ridiculous to think that I was that person. What is the probability of being that person? It's 0.0000. So of course, that happened with me as well all the time. And it had gotten to a point, even after this key, that I had decided that no, there was no chances that I had been him. And then please go on, Marcelo. And then I decided to watch, please go on, one more. And I decided to watch a documentary about Thomas Paine that I had on my queue on Amazon. And then I was watching the documentary, and suddenly the guy started to talk about the Bastille, right? The fall of the Bastille. And that one of the generals who fought in the American Revolution was the guy who was leading the French Revolution. And then this guy, who was the General Lafayette, was his name, he gave to Thomas Paine when he went to France, please go on, the key of the Bastille. So he knew Thomas Paine knew him from the American Revolution, and when Thomas Paine went for the French Revolution, days before it had happened, the fall of the Bastille, and then he got the key, the general, and gave to Thomas Paine to bring to the United States to George Washington. So another synchronicity related to a key. But then there's more. Please go on. Do you want to say something, Marcelo? You're muted.
Yeah. Keep going. It's very interesting.
No, and you remember I talked that I went with Luciano to all kinds of places because of her research. And then when she came to visit me to go to Boston to do her research, we decided to visit George Washington's house. I didn't know the existence of this key at that point at all. We went, we visited his mansion. The key is there. Can you see there, Marcelo? Yes. The key is there on the wall, is that particular key. Luciano and we didn't notice that at all, especially because when you enter the house, you have to follow like a line and a guide. So the guide didn't say anything about the key. We didn't knew about the key, but we actually visited the house of George Washington, and the real key is there on the wall. So it's really crazy. But continue. There's one more related to that. So the day that I actually had finally a retrocognition about that life, I was to Paris because I wanted to research more things about Thomas Paine there. And then I went to the National Archives in Paris, which is amazing. And then I went to that room and I was thinking, oh my goodness, everything in this National Archives is wonderful. The energy is so good. And then I look at the painting on the wall, and there is like a graph saying what are all the paintings, and there was Zephyr on the ceiling, right? Zephyr, which is, we know, Professor Valdo Vieira's identity. But go on. And then I went out of that room and I saw this, which is basically the Bastille, like a model with the keys. That was when I had the retrocognition immediately. It was like, I couldn't even think. I saw it. I started to cry, basically. And it was really difficult to get out of that because I was walking on the street, and my feeling is that I was living in the 18th, 19th century. I was there. So it was one of the elements that really make me see, okay, so I have to really take this into consideration. But there's one more. Please go on. And then Consecutivos, which is this institution that works with Seriexology, they went to give a course in Paris about Seriexology, about past lives, and I think it was a field course, I think, with energetic field and etc. I don't remember the details. But anyway, I was not part of the course. I was in Russia, but in the same day that they finished the course, I was in France. I had come back from Russia, and they say, "Oh, please come with us because we will have a dinner in this place that is Leprocop, that is basically one of the oldest places in Paris, where all the people from the Enlightenment, they used to go there and debate and talk." Well, so of course I was there. And then in the end, we realized that all of the rooms in that restaurant, they have names. And the room that we were was Lafayette, was basically the general who gave the key to Thomas Paine. So that was the room that we had the dinner.
So,
in.
well, that's amazing. And we have a question from Miriam here about beyond synchronicity, what would the key mean? Okay. And then I would ask, okay, would be a kind of retro code that you put in place?
So I've talked a lot to Pedro, who was the volunteer, the researcher who wrote Seriexology. The key to me, it represents a lot of things at the same time. One of them is really related to retrocognitions, related to past lives. And I even discover a previous life that it's also related to a key. That is a family in Firenze, or how it's called, Florence, Florenza, which the emblem, the icon of the family, it is a key. And the guy was a collector like I am today, a collector of a lot of objects. So it's really became another hypothesis mine, but the key represents so many things. The key represents elements of the proaxis, past lives, things that I have to pay attention in the future, signs that I have to pay attention that an extra physical team is with me at a certain moment. So I need to really stop everything that I'm doing and start being connected with multidimensionality. And the last thing that is related to is cosmoconscientiology. Again, in cosmoconscientiology, the access to cosmic consciousness is called the golden key. When you have the golden key is when you open the gates of the consciousness in order to have this expansion of consciousness. So it's basically related to all aspects of my life. For you to have an idea, I had how do you call this in English? Evolutionary duo, right?
Yes.
I was part of an evolutionary duo with Flavia Viana, which is a volunteer who is living in Rio nowadays. And when she was a child, she was shown in the first episode of Fantástico. Fantástico is a very old show in Brazil, a television program in which is a variety of programs. And in the first one, that it was in 1970, it was the year in which she was born. She was shown in Fantástico because she swallowed a key. So basically, they show all of her x-rays with the key in the middle of her chest. So you can imagine that how the key is crazy related to me and to other people. Luciana, for example, identification of personal retrocode. Yes, this is the course. So please, guys who never had in contact with this course, I really suggest you because it's really amazing.
Yeah.
But for example, one day I was talking to Luciana on the phone, and I told her, Luciana, I don't know what happened. I I stopped finding keys. So I don't know if I will ever find a key again. And then she said, oh, Luciana, okay, I'm going to the doctor now. I will talk to you soon. When she left the doctor, she found a key on the floor on the street. Then she called me, Luciano, I found a key. so so it's really crazy what happens. I think I went over the time, right? Sorry about that.
Well, we went over the time, but it has been a pleasure, Luciano. Your presentation, it was astonishing. Okay, it was a very well placed example of seriexological self-research. We would like to, on behalf of ISIC and all the audience, I would like to thank you for sharing your time, sharing your research for the first time in English with us. That's a pleasure, and I hope that you join future events of ISIC. Okay, we'll have the open doors for
Definitely.
you, and you have the key. Okay, you can use your key to open the door and come in and doing new
Not by
presentations with
chance.
us.
Not by chance. You have that first slide of Isaac, which is what opening doors and building bridges, right?
Yes, opening doors and building
So
bridges.
I have the key. I will be opening the door. And another detail is that Thomas Paine, he designed the bridge, and he wanted to sell the bridge to be installed in the UK, in England. So let's build a bridge.
Let's build the bridge. Let's open the doors. Thanks again, Luciano.
Well,
It's
let
a
me say
pleasure.
just a very quick thing.
Yeah,
Even though every time I present this people get super in awe of the synchronicities and all of the things that happen. I want people to know that that may happen with anyone. I'm not a special person. I'm not more evolved than any one of you. I think the only thing that I normally do is that when I do something, I go deep. I don't stop. And that's why I think it happens a lot of things with me. But other researchers, even in consecutivos, they have amazing experiences as well. When you start doing something, if you continue doing it, it will happen.
thank you. Thank you again. And
Thank you very much.
good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everybody. And let's come and join us in another Bridge Researchers in the coming months. Thank you all. Thanks, Luciano. Bye.
Bye.